Hey guys, tonight we're stepping onto a scaffold in the heart of a medieval town square, a platform of splintered oak planks that creak under your boots. The faint sway in them reminding you that this whole structure is meant to be temporary. The crowd is already gathering, boots squelching in the muddy ground from last night's rain, the cold air smelling faintly of wood smoke ale, and something metallic you can't quite name until you realize it's blood. It's old, dried into the grain of the boards, impossible to wash out, though someone has tried. Judging by the faint soap smell under it, you probably won't survive this, at least not as comfortably as you think. There's no hiding in the shadows here. You are standing in full view of hundreds of people who came for something they'd call justice. But you already suspect they came for the spectacle. And you're not the main act, not yet. But you are close enough to the edge of the scaffold to see the rope, the block, the straw underfoot to catch whatever spills. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're watching from somewhere far away, post your location and your local time in the comments. I'm always curious where and when my words find you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're here because you agreed, perhaps, too quickly to serve as an apprentice to the town executioner. The pay seemed decent, the lodging was included, and the master himself had a sort of grim authority that made him seem untouchable. You thought you'd be learning an unusual trade, something few could claim. You didn't realize you'd be walking into a world of superstition, social exile, and smells you will never forget. This morning, the bailiff gave you your instructions. Stand here, don't wander, don't speak unless spoken to, don't get in the way. He said it like he'd given the same advice to dozens before you. And maybe he has. The townsfolk glance up at you from below, their expressions mixed, some curious, some pitying, some muttering under their breath. Executioners aren't exactly loved here. Oh, they're needed, sure, but being needed is not the same as being wanted. From your position, you can see everything. The guards are setting up a rope line to keep the crowd back. The local baker is selling honey cakes to children who have no idea what they're about to witness. And right in front of you, your new master is inspecting the blocker scarred chunk of oak, stained a deep reddish brown that could almost pass for varnish if you didn't know better. He runs his hand over it like a craftsman checking his workbench, then glances at you. "You'll clean this later," he says, his voice low but firm. "Get used to it. The work starts when the crowd goes home." The thought makes your stomach turn. You'd half hoped your duties would involve learning knots, or polishing the axe, maybe even fetching water. Instead, your first task will be to scrub away the remains of someone else's ending. And yet, there's a strange sort of calm in your master's tone. He's done this so many times, it's just another chore to him. You remember hearing, before you took this position, that executioners often lived apart from the townspeople, in houses on the edge of the walls. Some say it's because their presence is bad luck. Others say it's because they handle what no one else dares touch. Historians still argue whether this isolation was more superstition or practical measure, but from up here, looking at the wary faces in the crowd, you start to think it's both. The sound of a bell interrupts your thoughts. Somewhere in the crowd, the condemned is being led forward. You're not here to watch. That's not your role today, but you can't help glancing. The prisoner is pale, his hands bound, his eyes fixed on the ground. The guard's hands grip his arms, and the noise of the crowd swells, a mix of cheers, curses, and the unsettling sound of laughter. You feel an odd tightening in your chest. You tell yourself you're just the apprentice, that your job is to observe and learn, but part of you wonders what kind of person you'll be after you've seen this a dozen times. You've heard whispers that some executioners start talking to themselves, or seeing faces in the wood grain of the scaffold boards. Whether that's true or just tavern gossip, you're beginning to see how the mind could wander in dangerous directions here. Your master steps into position. His posture is deliberate, almost ceremonial, like he's both a craftsman and a performer. You realize with a jolt that this is theater, as much as it is punishment. The crowd's reaction, the timing, the way the act is carried out, it's all part of a script the townsfolk expect to see, and you're now part of that script. Whether you're ready or not, the scaffold is empty now, the crowd drifting away like the tide after a storm. But the sound of them still rings faintly in. Your ears a murmur and roar that never really fades. The master executioner is coiling a length of rope, his hands moving with practiced precision, each loop identical. He gestures for you to follow him down the steps. You fall into step beside him, and that's when you realize he's not a tall, no towering, black-hooded figure like the ones painted in woodcut prints. He's wiry, with shoulders that slope forward as if he's spent his whole life leaning over something. His eyes, though grey and sharp, give you the impression that missing a detail around him isn't an option. This isn't a place for the faint, he says quietly, as if testing whether you'll answer. You manage a stiff nod. Good, he continues, because you'll be carrying the block tomorrow, and it's heavier than it looks. You're tempted to ask why. Why not leave it where it is? But you remember what the bailiff said about speaking only when spoken to. Instead, you glance at the block now lying in shadow, and it occurs to you that everything up there has to be portable. The scaffold is built and taken down for each event, stored in pieces somewhere until the next summons. The walk to his home takes you through winding lanes at the edge of town. You pass children playing in the mud until they see him. Then the laughter stops and they scatter. It's subtle, but you notice. The master doesn't react. He's probably used to it. You wonder if you ever will be. His home is just outside the walls, a squat timber-framed building with a sagging thatch roof and no neighbors for 50 paces in any direction. Inside, it's unexpectedly tidy tools hung neatly on pegs, a bench cleared of clutter, a small hearth with a pot that smells faintly of onions and salted pork. Sit, he says, pointing to a stool. On the bench before you is a collection of objects you've only ever glimpsed in passing, a broad-headed axe, with a handle worn smooth from decades of use, a smaller hand axe, a coil of rope, and a leather roll containing knives of varying lengths. There's even a thick wooden mallet, heavy enough that it could break bone with a single blow. You'll learn the care before the use, he says. An edge not oiled will chip. Rope that isn't kept dry will fray. And the people notice more than you'd think. It's an odd comment. You've always assumed the crowd only cared about the final moment, not the state of the tools. But as he explains, you realize there's a strange sense of ceremony here. People expect the axe to gleam, the rope to be strong, the block to be solid. He picks up the broad-headed axe and hands it to you. It's heavier than you expected, far heavier. Your wrist dips under the weight. Now, he says, tell me how you'd hold it. You grip the handle near the top. Wrong, he corrects you, guiding your hands lower, showing you the balance point. It's not about swinging harder, it's about swinging true. You practice lifting it, setting it down. He watches without comment, only nodding occasionally. You suspect he's testing your patience as much as your strength as the evening settles. He sets aside the tools and begins to eat. You notice there are only 2 bowls in the house jeers, and neither of them quite matches. He doesn't offer much conversation, but between mouthfuls he finally says, "You'll be up before dawn tomorrow. We have work. You want?" To ask what kind, but he's already turned his attention to the fire, stirring the embers until the room glows orange. That night, lying on a straw mattress in the small loft above his workshop, you hear him sharpening blades below. The rhythmic scrape of stone against steel is almost hypnotic. You can't tell if it's comforting or unsettling. Historians still argue whether executioners in the Middle Ages truly received special training or simply learned on the job. But lying here, you know which one you're getting. There's no manual, no classroom, just observation, correction, and the unspoken rule that mistakes are not forgiven twice. At some point the scraping stops. You hear him moving about, the clink of metal on wood, then silence. You're left with the sound of the wind moving through the thatch above you, and a faint smell of oiled iron drifting up from below. You close your eyes and wonder if you've stepped into a trade or a sentence. Before the sun even thinks about climbing over the horizon, you're awake to the sound of boots on the ladder. Your master's voice drifts up, low and matter-of-fact. Downstairs, now, the air in the workshop is cold enough to sting your nose, and you can see your breath as you follow him to the bench. Spread across it are the tools of the trade in neat rows, as if laid out for inspection. But today, you're not here to admire them, you're here to learn their upkeep. He starts with the broad axe, running his hand along the blade's curve. "Steel's like a horse," he says. "Treat it well, and it'll carry you far. Neglect it, and it'll throw you the first chance it gets." You're not sure whether that's supposed to be encouraging, but you nod anyway. He demonstrates how to hold a whetstone at the correct angle, the slow, steady scrape making the blade gleam in the flickering lamplight. Your turn. It takes you 3 awkward passes before you stop nicking the edge. He corrects your grip twice, his fingers surprisingly light on your wrist. "Patience," he murmurs. "An edge isn't made by rushing." Next, the ropes, coarse hemp smelling faintly of tar and smoke. He shows you how to run them through a cloth soaked in animal fat to keep them from fraying. "If it snaps," he says, "it's your fault. Doesn't matter if it's old. Doesn't matter if the weather's bad. It's your job to keep it." Right? You take the coil from him. It's heavier than you expect, dense and rough, the fibers catching on your skin. As you pull it through the cloth, the scent of the fat mixes with the smell of the workshop oil, with faint trace of blood that no amount of scrubbing has removed from the floorboards. Then come the knives. You'd assumed they were 4 smaller tasks: cutting bindings, trimming rope, but he explains they're also for more delicate work. "Not everything ends with an axe," he says, his voice flat. He doesn't elaborate, and you don't ask. Finally, he shows you the executioner's sword. It's longer than you imagined, double-handed, with a blade that tapers just enough for balance, but not for thrusting. "German make," he says, with a touch of pride. "No point, just an edge. Cleaner that way." Historians still argue whether these swords were truly better than axes, or whether the choice was mostly about local custom. Here, it's clear this man trusts both, but there's a reverence in the way he handles the sword that he doesn't give the axe. The morning light begins to creep in through the shutters as you work, the dull grey brightening the polished steel. You're so focused on oiling the last blade that you barely notice he's stopped to watch you. Not bad, he says at last. It's the first real praise you've heard from him. You feel a small swell of pride, though you keep your face neutral. After the tools are put away, he takes you to the yard behind the house. There's a stump there, scarred from years of use, surrounded by a ring of straw. He hands you the axe. Balance first, power later. You spend the next hour lifting, swinging, and setting the blade down again. The muscles in your arms and shoulders burn quickly, and he doesn't let you stop. Better to ache now than fail later, he says. By the time he calls a halt, you can barely lift your arms. You half expect him to tell you to rest, but instead, he points to a bucket of water. Clean the tools again. Sweat's as bad as rain for steel. You realize this is the rhythm of the job, not the dramatic moments in the square, but the endless maintenance in between. Every edge sharpened, every rope checked, every surface kept ready. The crowd only sees a few seconds of work. The rest is hidden here, in the cold morning light, with your fingers raw and your shoulders aching, when you finally collapse onto the stool. He brings over a hunk of bread and a wedge of cheese. It's the first meal of the day, and it tastes better than you expect, maybe because you've earned it. As you eat, he says, tomorrow you'll see more of the work. He doesn't elaborate. You don't press him, but you have a feeling more of the work doesn't mean sharpening blades. The square is empty when you arrive. A pale morning mist curling low to the ground. The scaffold is gone just bare. Earth now, damp from last night's rain. In its place lies the block, the ropes, and the scattering of sawdust that didn't get carried off on people's boots. The crowd saw justice done yesterday. What's left is yours to see to today. The master doesn't say much as he hands you a stiff bristled brush. Start with the boards. You kneel, and that's when you catch it again, that faint, coppery tang that rides just under the sharper scent of the sawdust. You try breathing through your mouth, but it doesn't help much. The damp has made the wood swell slightly, and you have to scrub harder to loosen what's lodged in the grooves. Each pass of the brush makes the water in the bucket grow darker. He moves methodically around the area, picking up scraps of rope, discarded nails, even a bent buckle from someone's boot. Everything goes, he says. Leave nothing behind. For scavengers, you've heard that word before, but here it doesn't mean animals, it means people. Bits of rope, chips of wood, even the sawdust could end up sold or traded as charms. For luck or for curses. It's the first quirky detail you've learned today, and it makes you glance around the empty square in a new way. You imagine someone creeping in after dark, pocketing a sliver of stained timber, whispering to themselves about the power it might hold. Historians still argue whether such superstitions were born from genuine fear or simply clever selling, but either way, the master clearly takes no chances. By mid-morning, your hands are raw from the brush, and the water in the bucket looks like something you'd pour out behind the stables. You're ordered to fetch fresh water from the public well, which means walking through town with the empty bucket swinging at your side. People notice you. Some step out of your path without making eye contact. Others glance quickly, then just as quickly look away. You're not wearing anything that marks you as an apprentice executioner, but somehow they seem to know. Maybe it's the faint smell that clings to your clothes now, or the fact that you're walking beside the master himself at the well. A woman with a basket of laundry mutters something under her breath as you pass. You can't catch all of it, but you hear the word hangman clear enough. The master ignores her entirely, drawing water with a steady rhythm. You copy his motions, filling your bucket, trying not to spill. Back at the square, you're set to work again, this time on the block itself. Up close, it's worse than you realized. Deep cuts from repeated blows crisscross the surface, each groove darkened by what they've absorbed. You scrape at them with the tip of your knife, working bits of straw and sawdust into the gaps to draw out the worst of it. The master watches for a moment, then nods. Good, keep at it. As you work, he tells you something unexpected. This block's been in use for nearly 30 years, he says. Traveled from village to village before it settled here. Outlived the man who made it. Outlived the last two in my trade. You pause, thinking about the hands that have held the axe before him, the apprentices who came before you. You wonder if they stayed long, or if they left as soon as they could. By the time the sun is overhead, the square looks almost ordinary again. The block is scrubbed, the boards stacked for storage, the ground swept clean. If you didn't know what had happened here yesterday, you might not guess unless the light caught one of those stubborn dark stains in the earth. Not bad, the master says again, which you're beginning to realize is his version of a compliment. Tomorrow's market day, you'll see another side of this work, another side. You're not sure whether that means more cleaning, or something much worse. Market day hums like a beehive. Stalls line the muddy street, canvas awnings dripping from last night's mist, merchants calling out prices for eels, onions, and rough-spun cloth. But as soon as you step into the crowd alongside your master, you notice something. There's a ripple that moves through the people. Heads turn, voices lower, paths open. No one says your name, most don't even know it yet, but you feel their awareness like heat against your skin. You're walking with the executioner, and that alone is enough to make you stand out. At one stall, a fishmonger pauses mid-sentence when the master steps up. He lays out a fat, gleaming trout, refuses payment with a quick shake of the head, and looks past him toward the next customer. The master accepts it without thanks, tucking it into his satchel. You raise an eyebrow. He notices. Not charity, he says. Fear. They don't want me cursing their catch. It's the second quirky truth you've learned, executioners. In many towns we're thought to carry an invisible weight, something that could bless or blight with a glance. Historians still argue whether this superstition was born from religious fear, or if it was a convenient excuse to keep certain people at arm's length. Either way, you can feel it working here. The rest of the morning passes in a strange rhythm. Some stalls press goods into the master's hands-bred apples, even a small pot of honey, while others suddenly find reason to busy themselves with other customers. One brewer refuses to sell to him outright, muttering something about unclean hands. The master doesn't argue. He just moves on. You notice that when people greet him, if they greet him at all, it's never with a handshake. A nod, perhaps, or a mumbled word, but no touch. You think back to the first time you met him, when he shook your hand. Maybe that was a test to see if you'd flinch. The strangest part is how quickly the market seems to forget you once you've passed. The moment you're a few paces beyond a stall, the chatter rises again, the laughter returns, as if the air clears when you're gone. At one point you linger behind while the master examines a bolt of cloth. Two boys, no older than 10, are whispering nearby. You catch the words apprentice and hangman before one notices you looking and pulls the other away. You wonder if, years from now, they'll be telling stories about seeing you in the market, the way people talk about spotting a wild animal. By midday, your satchel is heavier than when you started, and you've barely spent a single coin. Perks of the job: the master says dryly, though you can't tell if he means it as a perk or a curse. You pass by the church on your way home, and you notice something else. No one inside looks your way. The priest continues his sermon without pause, but you catch the faintest sidelong glance as you walk past. You wonder if you'll be welcome here at all, or if the executioner's bench in the square is the only seat you'll ever truly be allowed. As you near his house, the master finally breaks the silence. Tomorrow you train, properly. You almost laugh what have the past few days been, if not training. But you keep your mouth shut. Something in his tone tells you that whatever comes next won't be like sharpening blades or scrubbing blocks. For now you set down the satchel, and the smell of fish, apples, and bread fills the small room. Outside, the market bells fade, replaced by the quiet wind moving through the grass at the town's edge. You think about the way people stepped aside for you today, how some gave, some avoided, and all remembered, whether you like it or not. You're becoming part of the picture they see when they think of the executioner. And once that picture's painted, it's not easy to scrape away. The morning comes with a low, pearly light spilling through the shutters, and the smell of damp earth drifting in from the yard. The master is already outside when you come down the ladder, standing near the stump with his arms folded, the broad axe leaning against the wood like a sentinel. You've seen me work, he says without preamble. Now you see if you can. There's no condemned man here, of course just a straw dummy propped against the block, dressed in an old tunic that flaps slightly in the breeze. At its neck is a thick log, notched to hold it steady. He hands you the axe. Even after days of carrying it, the weight still feels uneven, tugging slightly toward the blade. You step toward the block, but he stops you. Not like that. Think about your feet. Wide, but not stiff. You're not hacking firewood, you're meeting a target at the right place and angle. You adjust, trying to remember his stance from the scaffold. He circles you once, like a hawk measuring prey. Good enough. Now no power yet. Just bring it down. Feel the balance. The blade comes down with a dull thud into the straw, stopping well short of the log. He has you repeat it again and again until your shoulders ache and your grip begins to slip. Then he has you rest the axe, pick up the executioner's sword, and start all over. The sword is lighter than the axe, but demands more control. There's no brute swing here, it's all about guiding the edge. The trick, he says, is not to think of it as cutting, but as passing through. The head isn't the target, it's the space just beyond. You try to imagine that, but it's harder than it sounds. The edge catches on the log, your follow-through uneven. He doesn't scold, just makes you try again until the sound of blade on wood is clean. Smooth dot in between your attempts, he offers. Strange little asides. In some towns, he says, they pay extra for a single clean stroke. Miss once, and they throw things. Miss twice, and they throw harder things. He's not smiling, but you can tell from his tone that this has happened to someone he knows, maybe even to him. He explains that straw dummies aren't just for practice. Sometimes they're used in public for demonstration, to assure the crowd the tools are ready. You picture him doing that, calmly swinging at a bundle of straw while the onlookers murmur approval, none of them realizing that precision is much harder than it looks from below. Historians still argue whether executioners trained regularly or simply relied on experience from infrequent jobs. But here, in this yard, it's clear skill is something he works at, even if the world assumes it comes naturally. By midday, your arms feel like they're filled with sand. He finally calls a halt, but instead of letting you collapse, he hands you a short rope and a wooden beam. Knots, he says. You'll tie the condemned, not too loose, not too tight. They've got to stand long enough for the priest, but not long enough to run. You fumble through the first few, your fingers clumsy. He shows you how to loop, pull, and anchor so the rope can be undone quickly after the work is done. It's an oddly delicate part of the job, and you find yourself focusing harder here than with the axe. When the lesson ends, the yard smells of churned straw and wood dust. Your palms are chafed, and the axe blade gleams faintly where it's been freshly sharpened. The dummy slumps, straw poking through its tunic, its log neck bearing the marks of your uneven strokes. The master looks it over, then simply says, "Better than I expected," which, coming from him, might as well be a standing ovation. That night, you fall asleep with the sensation of the axe's weight still tugging at your hands, and the faint sound of the blade's thud echoing in your ears. By the time summer arrives, your hands are stronger, your back is straighter, and the world outside the city gates feels like something that happens to other people. Most mornings, you're already awake when the bells ring. You've developed that strange executioner's apprentice habit of sensing the mood of the city before breakfast, whether it's restless, quiet, or thick with the hum of gossip. And today, the gossip is sharp and bright. The quarter sheriff is bringing a notorious outlaw to the scaffold. The man's crimes are repeated in whispers. He robbed noble processions, knocked over tax collectors, and this is the part that has people frowning. Took bread straight from the ovens during a feast day. Bread theft is a sin that lands somewhere between heresy and treason in the public mind. You follow your master through the streets, carrying the executioner's tools in a stout wooden chest. The townsfolk part to let you pass, but you hear the soft ripple of curses behind you. You've learned that their hatred is oddly aimed at the role, not the person. Mostly, the outlaw arrives under guard, and you're surprised. He doesn't look like a storybook villain, just tired. His hair is matted, his wrists chained, his ankles rubbed raw from the march. He grins when he sees you, but it's not friendly. Your master mutters, "Don't speak to him, not yet." Your part today isn't swinging the blade or tightening the noose, it's the prep work. You're responsible for checking the timber, frame for loose pegs, making sure the rope hasn't frayed, and oiling the blade so there's no embarrassing hesitation. A crowd is gathering, pushing closer, craning for a better view. The air is warm and smells faintly of roasted chestnuts from a nearby cart, which feels absurdly out of place. When the outlaw mounts the steps, he turns and addresses the crowd, declaring his innocence. Some cheer, some boo. Your master doesn't react. He's heard this before. You notice that the platform boards creak underfoot, and you make a mental note to suggest repairs before someone's ankle goes through next time. Historians still argue whether such public speeches were tolerated as a final mercy or allowed purely for dramatic effect. Whatever the truth, you see that it works. The crowd is locked on him, not on you. Then comes the moment when your master gives you a look, and you step forward with the water jug and cloth, dousing the blade so it gleams in the sunlight. It's your most visible act yet, and the sudden hush is dizzying. You can feel every eye on you. Somewhere in the back, someone spits. When it's over, the crowd begins to disperse, already moving on to the next story. You help wrap the tools, your hands shaking slightly, not from fear but from the sudden emptiness. The man's last words still echo in your mind, even though you know the town will forget them by morning. As you walk home, you realize you're starting to learn something the master never said aloud, that in this job, the days with the most noise leave you feeling the most hollow, and that the real work isn't the moment of the act, it's all the quiet labor before and after. The next weeks are quieter, but quiet is a relative word for an executioner's apprentice. There are still stocks to be repaired, shackles to mend, and the occasional scuffle at the debtor's cage that you have to help break up. Some days, you and your master take on less visible duties, floggings in the courtyard of the guardhouse, or escorting prisoners between districts when the jailers are short-handed. These aren't the scenes people crowd the square to see, but they leave their own marks on the mind. You begin to notice patterns in the work. Market days are busier not because crime rises, but because punishments draw better crowds. The authorities have learned that a public humiliation is more effective if there's an audience to spread the story afterward. And so, the scaffolds and pillories are set up in plain sight of the fruit sellers, cloth merchants and hawkers shouting about their wares. One afternoon, the quarter sheriff requests you specifically. A thief has been caught with a pouch of stolen coins, and they want him whipped in the market square for example's sake. Your master sends you ahead to prepare, handing you a coil of rawhide thongs. The whip is lighter than it looks, but you know from training that it can draw blood even through clothing. You stand by the post as the guards bring the thief forward. He's young, barely older than you. His eyes dart around the square, searching for escape, for mercy, for something. But the sheriff's clerk reads the charges in a steady voice, and the crowd gathers like a living wall. The actual strokes are not your job, yet that falls to your master. Your part is to keep count and ensure the whip is ready. You call out each number as the blows land. The sound isn't what you expect. It's less like a crack and more like a thud, followed by a quick intake of breath from the thief. By the fourth lash, his knees are trembling. By the seventh, the crowd has gone from murmuring to completely silent. By the 10th, it's over. You hand the whip back, coil it neatly, and follow your master as the guards lead the thief away. He won't die from this, but you can't help wondering whether his life will ever return to what it was before. The question lingers longer than you expect. Back at the workshop, your master sharpens tools while you scrub the wooden stocks with sand and water. Crowds are strange, he says suddenly. They cheer when they see what they expect and go quiet when they see what they didn't. You don't ask him to explain. You already have an idea of what he means. That night, you dream of the square, not of the thief, but of the way the people's eyes moved, the way they turned away when the blows got harder to watch. In the dream, you're the one standing at the post, waiting for a signal that never comes. One evening, after the sun slips behind the hills and the workshop is bathed in fading amber light, your master sits you down by the hearth. The air is thick with the smell of smouldering wood and old leather, and the quiet crackle of the fire seems to fill every corner of the room. You're thinking about the condemned, he says softly, as if reading your mind. You don't deny it. Despite all the lessons on distance and duty, you've found your gaze lingering on those about to meet their fate. There's a part of you that wonders what they think in those final moments. Whether they see fear, regret, or relief. You're told never to show kindness. He continues that mercy is weakness. His eyes flicker with a strange mixture of weariness and something else, perhaps regret. But I don't agree. You stare, surprised. Executioners are supposed to be cold, detached instruments of the law. Yet here is your master, confessing to a secret compassion. He tells you about the quiet words he's whispered, the hands he's steadied, the prayers he's muttered just out of sight. It's dangerous, he warns. You can't let it show, or the crowd will turn on you. They want their justice sharp and unyielding, not soft with sympathy. You remember the faces of the condemned. You've seen the pale outlaw with a grin that hid exhaustion, the young thief trembling under the whip's blows. You think of their final breaths, the way the light caught their eyes, and you feel something unexpected, an ache, a sorrow, maybe even a flicker of hope. Historians still argue whether executioners were feared monsters or misunderstood men. But in this moment, you understand that the truth lies somewhere in between. They are both the law's hand and its reluctant witness, carrying burdens that no one else will touch. The fire crackles, and for a moment you imagine what it would be like to carry that burden with compassion intact. Maybe it's impossible. Maybe it's necessary. You look at your master and realize that, despite everything, you're beginning to learn more than just how to swing an axe. You're learning how to hold a heart that won't break. The nights are restless now, shadows creeping just beyond the candlelight, and the sound of the wind through the thatch seems to carry whispers, some real, some born from your imagination. You've heard the stories, restless spirits of the condemned rising to haunt the scaffold, curses muttered under breath, and the ways executioners ward off the supernatural with odd rituals. Your master takes you to a small wooden box tucked beneath the bench. Inside lie dried herbs, bits of iron, and a small pouch of salt. Salt keeps the spirits at bay, he says, voice low. Iron keeps their claws from reaching you. Each night you watch as he carefully arranges these tokens around the house, and the workshop, muttering phrases in Latin and old dialects you barely understand. You try to mimic the words, but they feel strange on your tongue. One night, he shows you how to carve tiny crosses into the handles of your knives, explaining that it's as much to reassure your own mind as it is to ward off evil. The superstitions might sound quaint, but after a long day near death, you find comfort in these small acts. Historians still argue whether these rituals were widespread or limited to isolated pockets of belief. But you realize that fear is a constant companion in this trade, fear of the living and the dead alike. Despite your skepticism, you find yourself lighting an extra candle before sleep, the flickering flame a fragile barrier against the dark thoughts that threaten to crowd. And there's an odd comfort in the practical perks of your job. Your lodging, a simple room above the workshop, comes rent-free. At the market, certain vendors nod or smile when you pass, offering discounts on bread, cheese, or ale, and oddly, you discover you're exempt from jury duty. No one wants the hangman's apprentice judging their neighbors, but perks come with a price. Your social invitations are non-existent. At the tavern, the loudest laughter falls silent when you enter. Children cross the street to avoid your path. You're both essential and outcasted living. Contradiction. You overhear whispers that some executioners married only within their own families or kept to shadowy alliances with other pariahs. It makes you wonder whether solitude is fate or choice. The master says little about this, but you notice the way his eyes flicker when you mention friends or family. The trade carries invisible chains as heavy as the iron shackles you carry. Historians still debate how much social isolation was imposed versus self-selected, but living it, you feel the weight every day. Yet, within these boundaries, you begin to carve out a small space of your unquiet mornings, steady work, moments of unexpected kindness. Your training takes a darker turn when the master shows you the devices used for interrogation, the rack, the thumbscrews, the iron chair. He doesn't relish these lessons, his voice low and clipped as he explains how each tool works to persuade prisoners to confess. You're handed the key to a small box containing cruel instruments, needles, pincers, and a thin, twisted blade meant for dislocating joints. The master watches you handle them with a careful distance, his eyes shadowed. You ask why he teaches you this part. He shrugs. The law wants confessions. Torture makes sure of it. You need to know what you're doing even if you hope never to use it. You find the devices horrifying, yet strangely fascinating. The master tells you stories of confessions extracted, of innocent people caught in webs of suspicion and fear. It's not a job for the faint-hearted, he says. Historians still argue how widespread torture was and whether it was truly effective or more a tool of terror. But the master's grim lessons make it clear that the line between justice and cruelty is thin and easily crossed. You leave that day with a knot in your stomach, wondering how many secrets you'll carry that never see the light of day. Then comes the day when your master falls, ill a fever that pins him to the bed, pale and coughing. The bailiff's messenger arrives early, demanding the apprentice's presence for the next execution. You're thrown into the spotlight without warning. The tools you've learned to care for now feel heavier, the crowd's eyes sharper. Your hands shake as you don the dark cloak and take the axe from its stand. The prisoner is a woman accused of witchcraft, her fate sealed before she stepped onto the scaffold. The crowd murmurs, some with sympathy, others with hatred. You recall the superstitions you learned, Dian, salt, crosses, and feel a sudden urge to protect, even from the crowd's fury. Your master's voice echoes in your mind. Swing true, swift, no hesitation. The moment arrives. You raise the axe, the blade catching sunlight as you bring it down. It's not perfect, but it's clean. The crowd's reaction is a mixture of relief and awe. Later, back in the empty workshop, you collapse onto the bench, the weight of what you've done settling on your chest. You realize you've crossed a threshold, not just in skill, but in identity. This is no longer practice, it's your life. The days blur into weeks, and you find yourself standing often at the edge of choice. The role offers security and purpose, but it also demands sacrifices you hadn't fully imagined. You think about walking away, about what life might look like beyond the walls of this trade, but each time you picture it, the shadow of the executioner's axe looms larger, reminding you that few escape the legacy once they've touched it. There are moments of kindness, of unexpected grace, the master's rare smiles, the small tokens of appreciation from those who understand the burden you carry, the quiet evenings spent sharpening blades in the firelight. You realize that being an executioner's apprentice isn't just about learning to end lives, it's about holding the fragile line between justice and mercy, between fear and humanity. Historians still debate whether executioners were victims of circumstance or willing participants in cruelty. For you, the truth is complicated, tangled in every swing of the axe and every whispered prayer at night. And as the sun sets on your apprenticeship, you understand that this path, dark, lonely, and heavy, is yours to walk. The night wraps around you like a soft, heavy blanket, the quiet settling deep into your bones. The sharp edges of the day begin to dull, the smell of sawdust fades, the weight of the axe lightens, and the whispered voices grow distant. You breathe slowly now, letting the tension fall away, like leaves drifting gently to the ground. It's okay to feel the weight you carry. It's okay to hold both the darkness and the light in your heart. This job, this trade, this heavy mantle, none of it defines all that you are. Beneath the rough hands and steady gaze, there is space for kindness, for doubt, for hope. So as you lay down the tools and close your eyes, imagine the soft rustle of leaves, the quiet hum of a distant stream, the gentle warmth of the fading sun. Don't let the world's noise slip away, and with it the burdens of the day. Tomorrow is another step on this long, winding road. For now, rest in the calm. Sleep well, and when you wake, the world will be waiting ready for you to meet it again.